I'm Shaiza Rizavi, as Carlisle just said, and it's lovely just to see so many familiar faces. And I have had the privilege of watching Acumen for many years now, and for the last 6 years have really spent time getting more deeply involved, and the last 2.5 years have served on the board. And I was, in 2001, when Jacqueline started Acumen, it was the year I gave birth to my twins, and it was a really different time, as I was a public market investor, which I still am, and was finding investments that I thought would have great potential growth, and looking at cell phone companies in the way that Carlisle's talking about what is used so clearly back then. And we have Bob Collymore here also, who's been so important in that field. But back then there were under 700 million phones who were out in the world, out in the hands of people, mobile subscribers, and now there are well over 7 billion. And I feel like I've watched Acumen, with all its complexity and growth, develop from an earlier stage company to a more agile, still very complex, well-built organization that now Sachin and Sasha and Carlisle have described so well to us. So it's reaching out, affecting millions of people who are completely riddled with poverty. But I, in thinking about all of that, was especially honored to sit up here with Jacqueline and to think about what questions have arisen today, what questions have been on top of mind for people, but also just hear about where she thinks things are going. And think about, I first read The Blue Sweater quite a few years ago, and I think if you haven't read it, it's a pretty compelling account of how Acumen started in the early days. And I think that origin story, showed Jacqueline's sense of urgency and her restless impatience to actually think about how we could help create choice and reduce stress and alter mindsets and create networks and ecosystems and support all their complexities. So we've heard a lot of lessons from Sasha and Carlisle, but I'd love to hear from you, your perspective on the few important lessons and thinking about what's shaped and is going to catalyze Acumen going forward.
Thanks,
Sure.
Shaiza. Thanks for being such a great board member as well. Just to take a pause as well, just to see everyone here. This intimate session with just partners, no team, no friends, means a lot to us. And I can't see that many people, but I saw you coming in before. And to see so many people that have been on the journey with us since the beginning, and it really has been a journey. As Shaiza said, that when we first started, we were really looking at revolutionizing philanthropy. We saw that it was broken, it created dependence, we saw the power of the markets. And as Chris said, we had no idea what kind of returns that we would get. I was talking to our board chair, Bob Niehaus, and saying, when we first started, we thought somewhere between 75% to 100% returns was probably good. We didn't start Acumen to prove that you could make money in low-income markets that serve the poor. We started Acumen because we felt that the tools of business, of entrepreneurship, of capital, actually were the best ways to solve these problems of poverty. And we were pioneering on every different level, and it's one of the reasons when you look at Sachin's pie chart that you see so many different portfolio areas where we first started working. I remember early days with Yasmina Zaidman going to Bangladesh to try to learn about water. We had decided that we were going to work in the clean water delivery system industry. And at the time, the world was spending about $13 billion a year trying to get people access to safe drinking water. And we had been, as a world, for 20 years. And had not moved the needle one bit. And so when Yasmina and I went from the World Bank and the IFC and incredible charities to ask them what they were doing, they had all these numbers on impact. When we would ask them, well, how much water do people choose to drink themselves? No answer. How much does it cost you to deliver that water? No answer. What are some of the challenges that you face in delivering that water? So we had to figure out business models with absolutely no data. And it's interesting when you look at Acumen America today, when you're looking at Medicaid and welfare markets, we don't have a lot of data for building companies. So I would say at the beginning we were pioneering, Shaiza, that we didn't understand where markets could and should work and where they failed. Now, and I think it's embedded in what Sachin was talking about, now we've learned so much about how poor people make decisions, what they value. And so one of the reasons that we're big in agriculture and energy is because the very poor see a direct output that comes from their input that's meaningful to them, which is usually income or light, cell phones, connection. Somewhat shocking to us when we first got lean data that gave us real numbers was seeing that our wealthier customers are in health and education. But it makes sense because that comes after you can get some income for yourself. And water is kind of a disaster if you're just depending on the markets. And so our company, and I'll talk about this a little tonight, Water Health International, we were the very first investors in 2004. If we were traditional investors, we would have probably put the company on the market at some point and stripped the assets to take whatever money we could get back to our shareholders. By hanging in there, by helping them raise other kinds of capital, connecting them to markets, and then frankly to the goodwill of corporates like Coke and Diageo that brought in a lot of grant money, that company today brings clean drinking water to 7 million people a day. And it has fully changed the model for what is possible, but it is not a model that works only in the private sector. It's got to partner with philanthropy and government. So I think one of the big insights is that we've moved from thinking about philanthropy and how it has to change to having a lot of insight and tools around, frankly, changing capitalism. And I think that's one of the reasons that you've seen this real evolution where we're partnering with companies that also see that business has to change, where we're partnering with government that sees that it has to change, and we're partnering with civil society in different ways. And all of that is, to me, incredibly hopeful, and it means new sets of tools that we have to continue to develop.
Mm-hmm. And how, in investing in all of these geographies now, in the 13 countries and in these industries, what areas do you think are the greatest areas of growth now, based on that data you've gotten back and the information that you're thinking about?
Well, I think it's what Sachin was talking about, energy and agriculture, but particularly energy. Mm-hmm. We've learned through D-Light, and Andrea talked about scale, to just start snapping off some of our top companies that are really scaling can take your breath away. And I think we might need to do more of that even in our portfolio conversations. But D-Light has now brought clean, affordable electricity and light to 66 million people. Through learning with D-Light, we've been able to invest in another 20 companies across the products, the home systems, the mini grids, and now have real insight that's allowing us to build this $100 million off-grid initiative to essentially prove to governments that just as we did, as Africa particularly did with cell phones, this is a continent that has the opportunity to leapfrog the traditional grid through off-grid solar. And the reason is, again, people see the value. They want to make the purchase themselves. Because of cell phone banking, we now have the tools to enable them to pay for energy in the same way they paid for kerosene. So energy can actually leapfrog, for poor people particularly, government. And once you've got energy, you've got education, you've got health, you've got light, you've got dignity in ways that I don't think we also fully understood when Andrea gave us $1 million back in 2006 and said, why don't you go into energy? That has been an extraordinary journey for us. And if you care about women, you care about energy. And so I think energy is the model now. What we want to do next is to continue to pioneer in agriculture and then go deep in that same way. We've invested about $35 million in agriculture companies. The work we're doing in post-conflict Colombia will add to that. And then taking the lessons learned, how do we then move the world again with those insights? And I think it's connected to some Wells questions around how to really do this and do it at scale.
Mm-hmm. And if you're thinking about, even in that, let's say energy, which is so politicized, or you have a moment where...
Well, first of all, it's all politicized.
It's all politicized. Good point. What do you think is the role in looking at that sector or some others of philanthropy, of government, of aid, of Acumen now going forward in the partnerships that you're thinking about?
Well, in a way, I think it bridges what what Chris and a number of other people have talked about, I think we have, because we finally have a real tool in lean data to get us real data and real insights from the customers themselves. And because we're working within sectors in more deliberate ways, I think we can bring to government where the market works and where some level of subsidy is needed. My dream for a water health would be that we get so articulate at the level of subsidy that's needed and whether it's that government needs to pay for the capital costs or create a tax break, but that if we really want to scale this thing from 7 to 700 million, we still have almost 2 billion people with no access to safe drinking water, at least not on a regular basis. We need to bring those models forth. I'd love to see a deeper understanding of what real expectations are around patient capital in post-conflict areas. So in Colombia, USAID gave us $5 million to build companies in those post-conflict areas. Carlisle talked about how hard it is to do that. It's going to take us a long time, but the dream would be we would be able to say unapologetically, you want us to come into Zimbabwe when Zimbabwe's ready? This is what it's going to cost. Here's the kind of companies that can be built, and this is how much time it's going to take. I actually think we have a lot of that data already from work we've done in Pakistan and northern Uganda and parts of India, increasingly in Latin America, and that's where this global community, combined with the level of talent that we have leading each of our regions, and I hope you get to meet the regional and country leaders. They're extraordinary. And then taking these tools like lean data and moving it through puts us in a very different place. It's a very different chapter.
In thinking about that, you've always taught us or talked about how Acumen's purpose is deeply rooted in moral leadership. And thinking about human capital and that side of the ecosystem, what has Acumen learned about building communities and about how to engage different people who are thinking about battling these similar issues you're talking about, but from very different seats, like the people in here? How can we think about that?
Thank you. Thanks, Shaiza, for asking that. Sasha did a brilliant job talking about the work that we do in leadership, and it's funny, people give you insights, and I think sometimes it can take, at least me, a decade to really understand it, patient capital, but I think it was Nico, and I know it was Nico Kenner, but I think it was probably 8 or 9 years ago when he said that he was at Katzenbach, his consulting firm then, that he wanted to do a study on Acumen as a virtual organization because he said, I look at how much work at the highest levels, particularly back then at Acumen, is being done for people who not only don't get paid, but in many cases pay you a lot of money for the privilege. And we need to bottle that. We need to understand that. And when I look around this room, when I look around the world, it's awe-inducing. You heard Sasha call out Seth Godin before. He had the idea to have paid for courses. We thought $29, really? And he has helped build each of those paid for courses that have now brought $300,000 into Plus Acumen, to Samuel's question. That level of bringing marketing expertise and time to what we're doing, the way that Shaiza took it upon herself to actually write up a manual, and if anyone wants it, you can have it, I hope, to really talk about how she talks about her journey and how she serves as an ambassador and answers the hardest questions about Acumen to raise funds and support. Nobody asked you to do it. I could go on and on. I could look around this room and think about who's come on trips, what you've taken from those trips, how you've brought people together, how you are helping us communicate and learn, and how you are mentoring our teams. I even then look at some of the companies that are on this journey with us, like Bain and EY, that have brought a whole new meaning to what pro bono assistance is, supporting us full on. The law firms that year after year give millions of dollars of pro bono assistance there's something about a community that really holds these values. And Satya, one of our fellows, asked last night, like, why is it that every single person I meet, from the team to the fellows to the board and the advisors to the partners at Acumen to the chapter members, why do they all seem the same? Why do they all have this sense of goodness somehow in them? And I think that we raise probably some of the hardest kind of capital raise in the world. We want your philanthropy to invest in a company that may or may not work. We're not going to know for 10 years. But if it does, we say, we could really change the system. Philanthropy is used to immediate gratification. Here's a child that's suffering and we're going to help that child. That's not what we do. And yet, because so many of these companies have scaled, we know so much now. We couldn't have done it. Carlyle said it, that we can stand with the poor only because you have chosen to stand with us. And we do need to learn how to bottle that, because if there's a single theory of change that I would like to be more articulate at expressing to the world, it is a theory of change that starts and ends with the power of relationship, the power of trust, which we say is the rarest currency that we have, particularly in this divided moment where we can't depend on our political leaders and sometimes even our corporate leaders or our NGO leaders. We can depend on each other and building communities of trust around the world. And I think that this one, now thousands of people strong, stand for a set of shared values that can hold our diversity across race and class and division and ideology and ethnicity. This morning I got beautiful notes from advisors all over the world who just wanted me to know that, you know, they're here with us in spirit, and that part you can't measure.
Or bottle, yeah, it's hard. But I'd love to open it up just for a couple of questions if people have them, and then, will anyone have anything on the top of their mind to ask Jacqueline for this moment? Okay.
Jacqueline,
I'm not good at the
can
clock.
you speak a little bit about how you feel the face of the poor and the psyche of the poor has changed or not since you've been doing this work? It's such a time of despair in the world, it feels, and I don't know if you experienced that in your travels. So as you talked about the community of us, can you talk about the community of the poor a little bit from a heart and soul point of view?
It's such a great question, Mary Pat. I think that it's like everything else that's happening in the world right now. This is this moment of peril and possibility. And so peril in that when we talk, you know, when I was in the post-conflict parts of Pakistan, of Colombia, before the referendum on peace, we were in a high conflict area and talking to a woman farmer, and had a good rapport with her and said, "So are you voting yes or no?" And with this deep sense of honesty and integrity, she said, "I don't know, because there's an armed wing of the FARC that has broken off, and they're here whether I vote yes or no. And so I'm afraid for either vote. And I know my vote matters, but I'm so afraid." And so I think that there's more fear than we've seen in maybe since we started, maybe in my lifetime. On the other hand, the fact that we are in deep conversation with low-income people, including through this lean data stuff, I'm gonna, if I remember, because I don't know whatever I remember when giving a speech, but our team has talked to 20,000, or team has SMS'd or talked to 20,000 individuals now, and they are talking to us about their lives. and they're talking to us about their aspirations. And this idea that I want to do something in my life that makes me proud keeps coming up over and over, and that I want to do something to help my community. So I also think we're seeing an incredibly and increasingly empowered poor. And that's what we have to represent. And we gave a sneak peek last night to some of our largest supporters of a communications campaign that we're doing, where we've taken one of the world's best photographers that goes right up onto your face, Martin Schuler, and forces a confrontation. And we've gotten many of their stories to essentially say, I am the face. I am the face with all my beauty, with all my flaws, with all my aspirations, just like you. And I think that that's our role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's been, thank you all for joining, and thanks for sitting right now. But I think at this moment, I'd love to wrap up, as Jessica's told me a few times. Upstairs, there's going to be some tables where people can actually speak to different people from different geographies and industries. But I just would love to close with one request, quick request. Might you give us an idea of what is needed right now and how each of us seated in this room could contribute to ensure that Acumen continues on this path of strength to strength and works to disarm poverty?
So, since we're being told to wrap up, just very quickly, and I think Carlisle really set it up. The first is, and it goes back to these values and something we've been dreaming about a long time, which is to have independent yet interdependent countries and regions that form who we are. You look around the world and all of our teams are fully local. You'll meet them all when they're upstairs, that we brought the whole 100-person team from around the world. It's an extraordinary team. To get them more self-sufficient. To do that, we actually need more unrestricted capital that we can use to help move our companies. So number one is unrestricted capital. Number two, what a combination of Sachin talked about, we need to build a technology platform for our community to interact with more effectively around the world. That takes resources, that takes money and technology. And number three, to Mary Pat's question, we've actually never really done a big video of Acumen. On the communications front, how do we bring the deeper level of humanity to the work that we're doing at a time when the world is yearning to see our humanity in each other?
Thank you, Jacqueline.
And thank you all for making it work.
Thank you so much.